Welcome to our latest episode of The Green Dream, where I interview a series of fund managers and fund selectors and fund analysts who look at the sustainable and ESG world of investing. Today I'm joined by Tom Woodfield from Architas. Tom, good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks very
It feels
much.
like we're going through our own climate change moment, and it's feeling quite warm.
Yeah, it is.
It is quite warm, but just in case the viewers are worried, we are using LED lighting, so we're doing as best we could. But more seriously, I mean, you look at this sort of sector. I think one of the issues that comes up, interested to know your views, that the language you use, sustainable, ESG, we don't use ethical quite as much as perhaps we used to. When you think about, how do you think about these? How do you differentiate them perhaps internally, or maybe if you're talking to friends about the issue as well?
Sure, so I think you hit on an important topic in terms of language and definitions and a lack of standardization across the industry. But for me personally, when I think about sustainable investing, I think that is a catch-all term for a number of, or a range of approaches that apply different ESG criteria in different ways often. And then you have ESG, which is actually referring to the information itself, so it's non-financial information that actually can have an impact on companies' performance, and is more of a way of looking at the sort of bottom-up implications for, I suppose, company performance and their long-term viability. It's more of a part of the holistic picture.
Yeah, okay, lovely. And how do you integrate ESG screening within the portfolios that you input into? Do you have specific sustainable, green, ethical, whatever we want to call them, portfolios, or is it just another part of a sort of broader analysis of funds?
So actually we do both, and we do have a sustainable fund of funds. So we launched the Architas Positive Future Fund in July last year, and that is where we're looking specifically for funds with a sustainable investment objective. So that's one way of doing it. But actually we do a number of other things. So we have in our segregated mandates, we apply AXA group exclusions. So those are exclusions on coal, tar sands, oil sands, whatever you want to call them, palm oil, controversial weapons and tobacco. So that in those portfolios, because they're separately managed, we're able to provide an exclusion list to our underlying managers and they can screen them out. Whereas in our UK business, for example, where we're investing in underlying managers on open-ended funds, for example, we wouldn't be able to say to those managers, we want you to apply our sort of group exclusions on those. But what we do for those funds, and this is actually the main bulk of my role, it's why I joined Architas, was to implement an ESG analysis process within the investment team's research. So I actually look at the manager's investment process as well as the sort of firm level policies that are in place, and to make sure that they're embedding ESG criteria across the sort of start to finish of the investment process, if you like.
And I'm guessing when you're talking to individual underlying managers who may or may not be in sort of portfolios, you're spending a bit of time trying to get your head around what they mean by sustainability, because it's not even just shades of green, is it? I mean, people talk about sustainable business models, which in some case does have an environmental or social element. For others, it's a long-term business model.
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. I think actually because we've got a clear idea of what sustainable investing means to us and what ESG integration means, and I think there's similarities, but they're two sort of separate disciplines. Obviously, ESG criteria feeds into the whole sustainable investment piece. But when we're talking to managers that are offering sustainable investment products, so where ESG is crucial to the philosophy and how they invest. We make sure we're very clear on understanding whether this is an exclusionary product, whether this is an integration or a sustainability themed or even an impact product. And I think we're good at making that distinction. But in terms of ESG integration, this should be a sort of constant throughout across different investment processes in different asset classes in different regions. So actually, when we are asking those questions, we tweak them slightly for between asset classes, but actually we're still looking to see that managers are considering, materiality in different sectors, different industries, and actually how they go about finding that data and how about they go about implementing it. But we do have a standard framework for assessing that. So actually, I think that's part of our role as fund selectors to make that distinction and to make those judgments.
Lovely. And why do you think discussion about sustainable ESG investing has become so much more sort of popular, or at least talked about now, perhaps rather than sort of 5 years ago, when many of the underlying issues, the sort of climate issues, etc., have been around for a long time. Why now?
Yes, it's a very good question. I think a lot of this stems from the recognition that integrating ESG into your investment process doesn't harm performance. In fact, businesses that perform well on ESG criteria do show superior financial performance over time. So that's obviously awoken investment managers to realise that as a sort of risk-adjusted return tool, ESG makes sense. But then you've also got the client demand, and there's more interest, I think, because issues are so much more prevalent, are in the public eye now. You've got Extinction Rebellion, you've got Greta Thunberg with the school strike, and these issues are a lot more front and centre now. I think with social media, you're seeing a lot of these issues being sort of broadcast in real time on across platforms very rapidly. So, when you see wildfires in Australia and you see wildfires in the Amazon, you're able to instantly sort of engage with that and realise that this is an issue that's happening now. And also, I shouldn't forget to mention the performance of sustainable investment funds. You're starting to see those funds perform in line or even beat their mainstream benchmark. So I think investors, hard-nosed investors, are waking up to the fact that, look, there's possibility for returns here, and also data availability has become much better. I think you're right in saying that these issues have been around, of course, for a long time. It's nothing new in terms of the science, but what is new is the access for investors to these data sources. And in fact, now you're probably getting a sort of an avalanche of new data, and part of the job is to sift through it and see which is most important.
Which kind of neatly takes me on to what do you sort of think, the asset management industries, for other fund management companies that you're researching perhaps could do to kind of make the task a little bit kind of easier or a bit sort of clearer. Clearly, you know the subject, you're kind of wading through it. Clients in funds clearly don't have access to the same information or level of knowledge. There are things that you feel that the broader industry could do to make life a little bit easier for everybody?
Yes, definitely. I think you could be a lot clearer with the definitions and the terminology. But there is a temptation to kind of just throw a load of jargon into the investment policy. But I think the job of investment managers is to spell that out clearly in plain English. What are they actually trying to achieve, and what's the parameters for their investment universe, and what makes a good investment? What can the end client expect to see as a typical holding, for example, and maybe go into a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, okay, lovely. Now it strikes me this is a sector that's kind of come with lots of fascinating statistics and facts and stuff, and we were talking before we kind of went live. My favourite one, very similarly, is the amount of water that it takes for a cup of beer that somebody sort of shared with me. So I don't feel so bad about having a cup of beer, although I'm not sure I'm going to go into a pub and ask for a cup of. Are there any statistics that have really caught your attention the more you've got to know about, either because they're really impactful, or they provide you with some real insight?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of sustainability statistics can be quite depressing. But a colleague shared something with me earlier this week, which I thought was really interesting, and it was about sort of unnecessary emails. We think of emails as something that you just can fire off and that doesn't really have an environmental impact, but apparently, according to OVO Energy, if the UK working population sent one less thank you email, for example, or unactionable email a day, that would actually reduce 16,000 tonnes of CO2, which is the equivalent of 81,000 flights to Madrid. So,
which is great. So that's all those
a big impact of something you think of really small.
Those little emails that finish off with LOL or a little emoji at the end of it. Yeah, interesting. Tom, on a sort of on a kind of personal level, how would you say your own sustainability credentials are?
I think there's definitely room for improvement. I don't have a car. I do cycle to work. I've switched to renewable energy, but I think probably we're all quite guilty of this. Flying is something that I'm very conscious that uses has a big impact on the environment.
But it's really difficult in our industry, and there's a lot of travel involved, isn't there? And particularly you're going outside the UK. If you go to Paris HQ, I don't know what the environmental difference between
Eurostar's probably quite good.
It's probably quite good, but if you're going to the US for a research trip, for example, it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah, and I also eat meat as well, which is another no. I mean, how can you sort of shift your habits? It is tricky.
So on a scoring, we'll give you a sort of must do better. Yeah. But I think not having a car is
that's the biggest impact.
Is a very sort of big positive on your. And if you look at very sort of almost kind of day to day type areas, I mean, I've suggested would you use sort of hand dryer or sort of paper towels or plastic bags versus paper bags. Do you consciously think about those kind of things much?
Yeah, I think. The plastic bag thing has had a big impact on me. I actually did my dissertation for my master's. A group project on my master's on the plastic bag charge and what the optimal level was. When we did it, we thought it should be a bit higher than 5p. Yeah. I think a few supermarkets have recently raised it. I mean, hand dryers are preferable to paper towels, and changing to an electric car if you've got the opportunity. I suppose car sharing's kind of a recent. That's a really interesting one for me because Uber's been kind of castigated a bit for their social policies and their governance. But then there's the argument that could that lead to cars being taken off the road? I mean, I know at the moment there's quite a lot of traffic and black cab drivers aren't very happy about it, but there's always sort of a balance to be found in terms of your sustainability.
And many of these issues strike me as being quite complex. There's no kind of binary right or wrong kind of type solution. I mean, you just using the example you did is you explained it sort of very well. So it does make it hard for all of us. I'm not excusing myself for failing miserably here, but to your point, we can do stuff, but it's going to take longer to get sort of more long-term solutions, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Edison didn't invent the light bulb with electric light. He used the candle, so we can only use the solutions that we have available to us.
Well, I only found out sort of recently, the first wave of light bulbs all had over 100-year lifespans, and it's only in more recent times that some of the manufacturers decided that to give them more limited lifespan, so we all replaced them.
Planned obsolescence.
Absolutely. Apparently there's a 100-year-old light bulb still going somewhere in the Netherlands.
Really?
I've read somewhere. I haven't checked that for compliance reasons, but anyway. Now, sort of couple of sort of slightly fun questions, hopefully, to as we go through the end. So you have a choice of a couple of sustainable tea, sustainable coffee, even taking into account the amount of water tea and coffee go. But you've got a choice of Greta Thunberg, Sir David Attenborough, or somebody else. Who would it be, and why would you choose that person?
Yeah, I think we've got to go for tea, haven't we? It's more sustainable than.
I think
than,
so.
than
Yes,
coffee.
I've been shamed into giving up coffee, as we were talking about earlier. Now,
or beer.
Or beer. Yes.
You wouldn't be able to get away with that with Greta.
No.
Not to sort of disparage their achievements. Attenborough and Thunberg, of course, Greta's way she's captured the imagination of young and old people, and then David Attenborough is an absolute legend. It would be amazing to hear about the adventures, the stories he's been part of, I'm sure. But for me, the person that I'd sit down with would be Christiana Figueres. Okay. So she was the leader of the UN FCCC just after Copenhagen until after the Paris, landmark Paris Climate Agreement. And yes, I think what she achieved in 6 years was phenomenal, really, going from a disaster of climate negotiation, climate politics is not going to work, basically, to reaching this agreement. Obviously, there's still a long way to go, but I think it would be amazing to hear about how she sort of influenced, negotiated with these governments and leaders of countries, bearing in mind she had no, official legal authority. they are all sovereign, so she had to persuade these countries through principles of fairness and equality, and actually bringing developing countries on board as well, because that was a big issue, that developed countries are basically saying, well, we've done our developing and polluting, and you've got to carry the can for what we've done. But she managed to make everyone see the light, I suppose. And we don't want to get too carried away, because there's still a long way to go in terms of actually implementing these agreements. But
well, you might need no more than a little cup of tea with her, because she's clearly got a lot to talk about. It's a really interesting choice. Now, this is the final question. If you had a green dream, very a la Martin Luther King, that would make the world a better place, what would it be, do you think?
My green dream would be to have a global carbon price. I think the only way that we shift rapidly to renewables in the sort of less than 20 to 30 years that we have, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, I think that's the only way. The IMF said that we need a global carbon price per tonne of $75 to start to have a meaningful impact. I think we're average around $2 today, and there's obviously a lot of disjointedness. You've got the EU ETS in Europe, but China's just launched its carbon trading. It was due to this year. And then the US is a bit of an unknown quantity at the moment. So how do we bring those together? How do we have a global scheme, if you like? It'd be tricky, but you did ask for a pie in the sky dream, so that's what it is.
Well, actually, over the next 4 or 5 years, your dream, to your point about China starting up its carbon trading is perhaps achievable.
Yeah, I mean, if companies start to transition and start to produce more products that are fit for a low carbon economy, and that helps move that dial and leads to that transition, then I don't think anyone's going to complain, apart from maybe the oil companies.
Lovely. Tom, thank you very much for coming. Really enjoyed our chat.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.